Dr. Mestenhauser, much of our discussion has encompassed higher education. I'm curious about your experience in other arenas. How have you seen internationalization affecting these other contexts, please?
Well, again, I think there will be different levels of analysis that need to go into it. First of all, every discipline that we have has some, what is it called, some support groups in the community.
Right, right.
And so the assumption is, that the academic and the practitioners would work together, and that they would jointly embrace this internationalization.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is happening in the management and business.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it's all very instrumental, and it's dominated by the idea of the competitiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And quite often, people take the competitiveness very seriously to mean that we have to get what other people want, and we will prevent them from getting it.
Right.
And I think there are some voices being heard for the win-win
Mm-hmm.
approach to it, and I hope that they will win over time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the business people, being practical, have done probably a better job than anybody else in using some of the international knowledge and treating other people with the respect that is needed, and with the recognition that they have their own interests as we do
Right.
ours too. So no, I think that's the most hopeful thing, and I'm very pleased with what the School of Management is doing, particularly and Angela, for example, is spearheading some fantastic programs. I'm just very pleased with that. The other example of that is that the groups work not just with individual businesses, but with collection of businesses.
Mm-hmm.
I'm referring particularly to the university status as a land-grant institution.
Mm-hmm.
That was, of course, oriented to practical application of knowledge to specific sectors of life and so on, and mostly in agriculture, biology, and fields like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the organization, I forget the present name, they just changed the name, it was called NASULJEC, National Association of Colleges and Universities, State Colleges and Universities. And I was kind of associated with them through Gene Allen and some of the other people, and I was for a while chair of one of the subcommittees that was trying to negotiate with the World Bank about some issues out here too. So NASULJEC has done a very good job, and I think in pulling together, they have a very strong international committee. Again, the problem with many of these organizations is that they establish the regular functions that they already had, and then they slap on international as an added on.
Right.
So the people who are interested in international have a home, but it doesn't relate to anybody else. Now, I think that's one of the problems that we have when we're trying to reach out. I think the medical school has just started out now, expanding, and they are doing also an outstanding job. Because before that, there was the assumption that our medicine is the best in the world, and that we don't need to look for anybody else until we discover that the Swedes and the Germans and the Brits are doing something that we didn't even know was being done.
Yes.
And the same was true of engineering. I think at one time there was a very strong group there in engineering. It was called the Association of Engineering Education. And these were people who embraced the internationalization agenda until the Congress decided to investigate. Too many Chinese students studying PhDs in engineering, and is that a threat to our national interest?
Right.
So they uncovered some retired admiral, rear admiral. I'm always puzzled by the term rear admiral, what that meant. But anyway, the rear admiral published a book in which he concluded that this is not a problem of foreign students, but problem of U.S. students who don't embrace these fields. And so that they need to do a little more than that. But they published a corresponding little pamphlet out here in which they identify topics and research and things that were being done by other countries about which we didn't know. And we didn't know about them because we didn't trust knowledge that we don't produce ourselves. So here we have, you see, back again to the mindset, to the ethnocentrism and so on. And I think they try to change that too. And the funny thing on that was that the countries where this was being done wasn't Germany and Japan alone. Bulgaria, for example, was listed as one of the key countries doing engineering research and so on. So that was a kind of a wake-up call for people. On another general note, and I think take personally a lot of credit for the establishment of the Minnesota International Center, you know, because we needed in the community an organization that's a kind of support group for us. Everybody else does have it except International. And I'm delighted that the university continued to give them housing, and they actually relocated them when the building was condemned to. There was some very big problem because the business people at the university just gave an eviction notice and you take care of yourself someplace else. And that was would have been very damaging because we do need to have that kind of a community. Now they specialize on more general kind of public education, you know, mostly associated with the Foreign Policy Association. You know, that one is not particularly oriented to cultures, but the magazines that they publish and the foreign policy forums and so on are very high quality, and they constantly produce new knowledge about these countries. So I'm very pleased with the way that this is happening, and there's another direct connection, and that is what they call it the International Classroom, and that's a program based on a contract basis with a large number of high schools. You know, I think maybe even school districts or school systems, whereby they organize a program that sends international students into the classroom, and not just one at a time, but over a period of maybe 2 or 3 or 4 occasions. And that one was very well received by the principals, the social studies teachers, and others who can build on that. And I think for a while that management of the program went downhill, but you know, I think it's been recovered again and will be a very good. We need to present to the community the international students as teaching us, not just being taught by us, and I think that this program certainly does accomplish that too. I can't think of any other community connections out here except one time we had a very highly internationally oriented faculty member on the St. Paul campus, and he invited me to speak to one of their annual meetings there too. And so I thought a little bit about that, and I submitted a topic which was putting culture into agriculture.
I remember you,
And he warned me that there would be hardly any attendance, but it was something like 60 people who came up, a very lively discussion. So again, I think, people like the agriculture people and so on think practically as well, and they process that information and retain it. And so for me, it's been a delight to work with agriculture. We had helped them one time to obtain a $5 million grant in Rwanda. And the dean required every faculty who would be going to attend special orientation sessions. We didn't have anybody from Rwanda here, but we really had to import some people. And we had about 10 sessions related both to Rwanda and to cross-cultural training. The very first session that we had, we tried people to introduce themselves. We kind of assumed they knew each other, but they didn't. So that tells you a little more about the interdisciplinary nature, and yet the project required interdisciplinary cooperation. It had to do with the production of protein, mostly. Let's see, what was the product? I forgot now. Anyway, so as we went around to introduce ourselves, the first speaker said, "I'm a feminist and I don't think I've had any business having this kind of an orientation session until we resolve the gender issues." I said, "Well, thank you for your contribution to this information." Another one said, "Well, I'm so-and-so and I'm from such and such department, and I want you to know that we don't trust you people from Minneapolis campus." So that was the atmosphere that we started with. And so we went very slowly, of course, and very gently and so on. And people listened, they took notes, and they had good questions. But what really impressed me is that the very last session was a retreat with an overnight stay outside of the campus. We used an ancient monastery someplace, I forget now what city it was in, and we brought in a lot of foreign students from mostly African countries, and they had panel discussions and so on. And it was a turning point for the faculty. They finally recognized the importance of this. And for example, we even staged a little skit about how you interview a cabinet minister. And initially it kind of was funny and everybody laughed. And then at the end, when we had a discussion about that, they realized that there's a totally different conception of power, authority, channels of information, and how the American fits into that too. And but the most amazing thing was from the home economists. I hope they won't hear me say that too, but they didn't really think that they needed any orientation because they know exactly what they are doing. They already had a questionnaire prepared to go from household to household and inquire about the eating habits of people and the cooking habits as well too. Well, it so happened that the questionnaire was in English, and that the house ladies would hardly speak French, even though it was French dominated, would speak the dialect. And thirdly is that they didn't have any kitchens. They just had a corner with a burning stove or something. And fourth is that the poisoning of food was the major issue in that those homicides, those targets against the Hutus and the, what's the other name of the group? So we had to change their minds, This was a major turning point for them. So they realized that they just don't go from household to household. And certainly not alone, that they would have to have people to translate, or that they would have to get the women out, because they were a little bit ashamed of the poverty that they lived in. and so they didn't want foreigners to observe it.
Yeah.
So that all related to the project.
Yeah.
So, but one of the things that we taught them was how to evacuate in case of civil war,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
it worked.
Yeah. Dr. Mestenhauser, may I ask you just one question about this?
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about academia, and this is, we've talked about business too in this question. One thing that it seems to come back to is this practical application. People that have a practical grounding in it or seeing a need seem to embrace this more. Do you feel that this is just a necessary part of getting, let's say, academic faculty, once they see that there is a practical need to it, it is a necessary component for mindsets or for understanding the importance of internationalization?
I think that that's one of the gaps, that we have out here, although the business schools generally do a good job, but they only address the managers or the presidents of corporations. They go higher up.
Right.
And the problem is that the presidents don't affect their own organizations internationally.
Right.
And that the international divisions in corporations are much the same as international offices in the universities.
Mm-hmm.
They are out there, they function, they are well-funded usually, and so on. But reach out to the general public is a major problem for them, and many of the people, let's say, who have come back to the corporation, once a year they call them in and so on, they complain that nobody really understands them, nobody associates with them. They say, "Oh, hi Bill, how are things going in Indonesia? Good work, and goodbye."
Yeah.
That's kind of a reaction too. So there's very little of that too in the effort of the Bank of Boston, only related to jobs that are needed for international operation. As I mentioned before, you need to know the exchange rate, how they change. You need to know the time zone so that you can function on a 24-hour basis, for example, and that's the kind of limited knowledge that they expect the clerks to have, and that's not very conceptual out here.
Okay.
So that there's a major gap. I think that the people in agriculture have done a much better job through some of the extension divisions, for example.
Sure.
There is a person there in extension division, a former student of mine, who is doing just that very successfully. And we used to have a program here that I wish the Minnesota International Center would start again too. We call them international embassies. We would take a busload of foreign students, go to a city from Friday, Saturday, and come back Sunday, late afternoon, stay in homes, participate in programs, organize some of our own programs, and these have been just so well received, and the impact was incredible. But in each case, we also provided specialized information sessions for the faculty for the families that will be hosting them.
Fascinating. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mestenhauser.
Okay.